Hello Year 9 and 10. Today you'll be revising Checking Out Me History by John Agard. To get you started, can you match up the key words to their definitions? Pause the video now to give that a go. Okay, check your answers. Colonialism is a large subject and hard to explain concisely. Colonialism is where one country takes over another and forces their so-called superior beliefs and cultures onto its locals. Historically, the countries to have colonised huge swathes of the world have been Britain, America, France, Spain, and the Netherlands, which is why many countries speak English, French, Spanish, and Dutch. Colonialism is a very dark part of our history, where the colonisers took over countries violently by force and tried to apparently civilise its locals. I say civilise very ironically here. It is a language the colonisers would have used, as the implication was that anyone who didn't have a Western way of living was deemed to be lesser in some way. The colonisers took land, they took natural resources like gold, tea, and spices, and they also took their people by forcing some of them into a life of slavery. The colonisers also did what they could to eradicate the locals' beliefs and cultures and to force Christianity onto them. Colonialism holds the roots of white supremacy, which continues today. The belief that white people are better than others and should therefore be dominant over them. This is a very dangerous way of thinking and is the root of many of the ills in our world today. Anglocentric is revolving around English or British culture and history whilst excluding a wider worldview, so the belief that English history and English culture is the most important. Colloquial language is informal language, so the way you would speak to your friends and family opposed to how you would speak in a job interview. A dialect is a form of language which is specific to an area. For instance, people from London and people from Birmingham both speak English, but they may have different ways of saying certain words and they have different accents. Okay, if you know what Anglocentric is, then you should be able to attempt our STAR challenge and guess what Eurocentric is. It is basically revolving around a European culture and history and seeing that as the most dominant and important. So today you'll be revising Checking Out Me History by John Agard. It is another poem in our AQA Power and Conflict cluster. You will be doing some comprehension questions and answering an essay question. What can you remember about Checking Out Me History? Can you write at least 3 details from the poem? And if you can remember any quotations, that would be brilliant. Write those down too. Pause the video now to give it a go. Let's have a look at these questions. Do you know anything about the Battle of Hastings, Christopher Columbus, and the Napoleonic Wars? In all likelihood, you would have heard about these things even if you don't have any concrete facts about them. Though I should hope that you are at least aware of the year of the Battle of Hastings, as many of you live here. Now look at the purple section. Nanny of the Maroons, Toussaint L'Ouverture, and Mary C. Cole. In all likelihood, other than from your initial reading of this poem, you probably have never heard of these individuals. That, in a sense, is the whole point of this poem. The people in the purple section are impressive and noteworthy. They have made some great accomplishments in their lives. Yet because they are black, we have not heard about them. What do you know about John Agard? Can you pause the video now and write down some notes? Add to your notes. John Agard was born in a South American country called Guyana. When Agard was a child, the country was known as British Guyana and was owned and ruled by Britain. The schooling Agard received was very Anglocentric, so concerned with British and English views, even though his country was one of varied people and cultures, and even though it was based in South America, you can see it there in the red circle on the map. In 1977, John Agard and his partner Grace Nichols, another Caribbean poet, moved to Britain to pursue their dreams of becoming professional writers. If you have a look, we have some quotations directly from John Agard himself. It's important to read these to understand his point of view. So the first one, the sooner we can face the fact that Western education is entrenched with preconceived notions of other societies, the better. It's healthy and liberating to question those perceptions. So essentially, he's saying that Western education is filled with prejudices and predetermined ideas about other societies and cultures. It can be very one-sided, and we need to be more aware of the true history of other countries in order to fully appreciate them and their people. He is saying it is healthy and freeing for us to question our preconceived ideas. The second one. Part of the excitement of writing, how you can give a voice to certain characters or people that are usually voiceless. Therefore, he is writing for marginalised people, so people who do not often have a voice nor a platform to be heard from. Add to your notes, this time it's about our poem. So the poem is about cultures, identity and the impact of colonisation. It is written in first-person narration and Agard is using a Caribbean dialect in the text. He uses the language of Creole, so mixing English and African dialect, to tell most of his story. Agard discusses the fact that he was educated in a school in the Caribbean about many elements of British history and culture, including nursery rhymes and stories. He was not, however, taught anything about the key figures from his own Caribbean heritage, such as Toussaint Louverture and Mary Seacole. I would be doing an injustice to this poem if I did not mention it in light of the events which have been dominating the news of late. Can you pause the video and just have a think about what the Black Lives Matter movement is and what we could do to help? The Black Lives Matter movement started as a reaction against brutality to black people in America. It began in 2013 as a movement on social media with the hashtag Black Lives Matter. This was in response to George Zimmerman, who shot and killed 17-year-old Trayvon Martin in 2012. When Zimmerman, who was not a police officer but was part of the Neighborhood Watch, was acquitted or was declared not guilty in 2013, this sparked outrage on social media and the movement kicked off. There have been many thousands of innocent black lives lost in America, and thousands of them have been shot by police. Of course, the most recent example, which has sparked protests around the world, was the killing of George Floyd by a white police officer, Derek Chauvin. So when people say, all lives matter, yes, of course they do. However, it is black lives who are dying every day. So they are the ones we need to support right now. Killings are the most extreme versions of racism. Yet there's racism entrenched in our cultures. England is not innocent. Black people are more likely to live in deprived areas and have access to poorer education, therefore less likely to attend university. They're less likely to be hired for jobs, so therefore they're more likely to have a lower income and to have a lower life expectancy. This is because of institutional or systemic racism, which allows for black people and for people of other races to be discriminated against on a grand institutional level. Most workplaces, for instance, have white male managers. Also, just look at our parliament. Our country is run by white men. Of course, there's nothing wrong with white men, but there needs to be a mix in order for people to be equal and for equality to prevail. So what can we do to help? Number one, we can educate ourselves, not just on the cruel injustices which is so important to learn, such as slavery and systemic racism, but also the wonderful accomplishments of black people and their rich and diverse history. Number two, we need to look inwards at our own prejudices, so our own judgments of people, to learn from them and to become better. You may think you have no prejudices, but imagine seeing an old man hunched over walking slowly. You may draw conclusions that he's physically weak, but he may have spent his entire life working a very physical job and could have more muscles than you. We all have prejudices. What we have to do is acknowledge these for what they are and try to let go of them. And finally, we need to become an ally, so we need to become a friend. So in a heated situation where someone is being deliberately nasty to another person because of their race, sexuality, gender or disability, it's very hard for the victim to stick up for themselves. But if you can step in, whilst being sure to protect yourself, then having that support will give the victim strength and could hopefully be the beginning in changing the other person's opinion. Being an ally can also mean calling people up on their prejudices, even if there's no black person in the room. We are almost at our poem now, so I want to make a quick note on poetry. Poetry began as an oral tradition, so it was meant to be spoken rather than written down. For many cultures, including those of the African slaves sent to America and the Caribbean who were not allowed to learn to read, this tradition continued. Slaves often sang to keep up morale. Oral poetry often features repetition, strong rhythms and chanting style lines. Structurally, this particular poem combines two different styles, so as we are reading, it is important for you to consider why this might be. It's worth saying that I'm not going to attempt the Creole accent, but I would urge you all to check out John Agard reading the poem himself on YouTube. There are many videos available of him doing this. It's important that you hear exactly how it's meant to be spoken, and I for one would not be able to do it justice. Additionally, the stanzas which are not written in italics are supposed to be sung, which really shows him paying tribute to the oral tradition of poetry from his culture, yet I'm afraid I will not be singing this today. Checking out me history. Dem tell me, what dem want to tell me. Bandage up me eye with me own history, blind me to my own identity. Dem tell me 'bout 1066 and all that. Dem tell me 'bout Dick Whittington and he cat. But Toussaint L'Ouverture, no, dem never tell me 'bout that. Pause the video now and try the questions. Number 1. The first line or clause gets repeated throughout the poem. You could refer to this as repetition, and you would be right, but a higher level device for this is anaphora. One of the first things you'd notice is that it is written in a colloquial or informal style, and it is a representation of the Creole dialect. By writing in this non-standard way, he is giving the marginalised, or essentially a group of people who are seen as powerless, a voice. It is important to question who is the them the narrator is talking about. We could infer that it is his teachers, but additionally, it could be the them of an entire system. By using the pronoun them, it contrasts with us and therefore shows the huge chasm between minority groups and the white establishment which rule them. Politicians and education ministers are a part of this institution. Number 2. The second stanza has two powerful metaphors. His eyes are metaphorically bandaged with his own history. Bandages are supposed to heal, and education is to enlighten. But here, it shows he is being blinded by the education he's receiving, as he is ignorant of his own history. Blind me to my identity works in two ways. He is metaphorically blind to his identity, but he is also being blinded of his identity. Either way, it shows his own ignorance, which is developed by a system, and the general whitewashing of history, where facts about black culture have been hidden. This should also be read on a bigger scale of how damaging the covering up of black history is. Additionally, this begins the lexical set of sight, which is an extended metaphor throughout the poem. He should be enlightened about his own culture, but the bandages, which should be used for good, are used to keep him blind and ignorant. Number 3. Remember, Agard lived in South America, yet he's being taught British history. 1066 is the Battle of Hastings. Also, he's taught about Dick Whittington, a fictional character and English folklore. So, fiction from another country has become more important than black history itself. Toussaint, a slave with vision lick back, Napoleon Battalion and first black Republican born. Toussaint de Thorn, to their French Toussaint de Beacon, of the Haitian Revolution. Pause the video now and try the questions. Number 4. This stanza looks different. It is written in italics and is separated as a stanza. Also, when he reads it, Agard doesn't sing this bit. It is done in this way because he is separating the things he was taught in school from the elements which he wasn't taught but feels are just as important. He uses the physical separation of the stanzas and the font styles to indicate to us which culture he is referring to. He is teaching us in this part. Number 5. Agard is providing a voice for the marginalised in this poem, so for the people who are oppressed and not given the same opportunities as others. Therefore, this section is not written in first person, as the majority of people, including the marginalised, would have received an Anglo-centric education, not one focusing on black history. Therefore, they would not know about Toussaint L'Ouverture. It is not coming from them, it is coming from the narrator who has learnt about this history and wants to impart knowledge onto the world. Number 6. The word vision is important because it links to the lexical set of sight and enlightenment and shows how remarkable some black figures were. We have all heard about Napoleon Bonaparte and the French colonial system, which oppressed the people of Haiti. Yet this French military and political leader and his troops were defeated by Toussaint, who had a vision and led a revolution which freed an entire population of black slaves from their oppression in Haiti. Which begs the question, why aren't we taught about these powerful black figures from history who did really well in the face of their oppressors? Dem tell me about the man who discovered the balloon and a cow who jumped over the moon. Dem tell me about the dish run away with the spoon, but dem never tell me about Nanny de Maroon. Nanny, sea far woman of mountain dream, fire woman struggle, hopeful stream to freedom river. Pause the video and try the questions. Number 7. The man who discovered balloons was British, and this was, by comparison to Toussaint's achievements, not that notable. By failing to mention his name, we know that the narrator doesn't view him as important. This is mere trivia rather than an important historical event. Number 8. The link to British nursery rhymes, so a cow jumping over the moon and the dish running away with the spoon, tells us he was taught fictional nonsense and these were prioritised over his own history, culture and identity. Number 9. We are not taught this in the poem, but Nanny de Maroon was a leader of a group of ex-slaves who fled slavery to create their own community. Although he doesn't detail her achievements, the pure mention of her could spark our interest in order to research and learn for ourselves. He emphasises her importance by setting her apart in an italicised stanza. He also uses the metaphor of firewoman, which makes her come across as strong, powerful, courageous, angry and passionate. These qualities helped her to gain her freedom and the freedom of others. Number 10. Seafar woman again links to the lexical set of sight. It shows she is a visionary. She has a dream of freedom, a dream which seems so difficult and far away that it seems almost impossible, but through her resilience and determination, she manages it. Number 11. We have two forms of personification in this stanza, hopeful stream and freedom river. A small stream of hope and a vision lead to the giant river of freedom for so many. Dem tell me about Lord Nelson and Waterloo, but dem never tell me about Shaka the Great Zulu. Them tell me about Columbus in 1492, but what happened to the Caribs and the Arawaks too. Them tell me about Florence Nightingale and she lamp, and how Robin Hood used to camp. Them tell me about old King Cole was a merry old soul, but them never tell me about Mary Seacole. Pause the video now to attempt the questions. Number 12. Once again we have a Eurocentric version of history. Lord Nelson did really well during the Napoleonic Wars and helped to win a number of British naval victories with his leadership. Also, the Battle of Waterloo marked the end of the Napoleonic Wars, with the British and their allies defeating the French. Therefore, by mentioning these two aspects of history, once again the narrator is being taught of the superiority of the British. Number 13. This is a tough question, as by the very nature of it, Agard is making the point that our education leaves us ignorant of Shaka. In 1879, approximately 60 years after the Napoleonic Wars ended, the British attempted to colonise part of South Africa, which the Zulus resided in. Shaka was the leader of the Zulu nation, who united all the surrounding tribes and challenged the increasing presence of white settlers who wanted their land. The Zulus annihilated the British colonisers. The British were so arrogant that when news of this reached home via a telegram, they believed it to be a hoax. By juxtaposing Lord Nelson with Shaka the Great Zulu, Agard is making the point that we are only taught of white winners and British victories. Number 14. So we've all heard that Christopher Columbus, an Italian-born captain, discovered America. Obviously, this is ignoring the Native American tribes who had called the land their home for thousands of years prior to Columbus. The Caribs, who incidentally give their name to the Caribbean, and the Arawaks lived there for centuries before Columbus. After he supposedly discovered America and the Caribbean, both the Carib and Arawak tribes were enslaved and killed off. Therefore, our education is once again whitewashing history. Number 15. Robin Hood and King Cole are mentioned, once again stressing the point that teaching fictional British characters is prioritised over black history. From Jamaica, she travelled far to the Crimean War. She volunteered to go, and even when the British said no, she still braved the Russian snow. A healing star among the wounded, a yellow sunrise to the dying. Dem tell me what dem want to tell me, but now I checking out me own history, I carving out me identity. Pause the video now and try the questions. Number 16. Both Florence Nightingale and Mary Seacole nursed soldiers during the Crimean War. Mary Seacole's offer of help was rejected by the British establishment because she was black. This didn't stop her, and she set up her own British Hotel, as it was called, to tend to the wounded soldiers. As the British establishment didn't want to recognise her, she was forced to find ways to fund it herself. Yet we only hear about Florence Nightingale. Number 17. Both Healing Star and Yellow Sunrise are metaphors to describe Mary Seacole. They form part of a lexical set of light within the poem. Both quotes imply positivity and hope in a time of war and darkness. A healing star among the wounded is really powerful, as it shows that she was a very hands-on nurse in the thick of it when helping the British wounded soldiers. By comparison, Nightingale, though she did much to transform nursing and bring about sanitation, she was relatively hands-off and more of a manager. Yellow sunrise also implies hope, as the break of a new day would do. If we link back to the beginning of the poem, where our narrator is blinded by bandages to his own identity, by learning about Seacole and the others, he is becoming more enlightened. So the metaphor and imagery of sunrise could be powerful in that sense. Additionally, we often associate Nightingale with her lamp, which Agard does here. By using more natural and powerful imagery towards Mary Seacole, such as a star and sunrise, we could argue that she is viewed as more powerful by the narrator. Number 18. The ending is similar to the beginning, so we can view the structure as somewhat cyclical. However, the narrator has become more enlightened, independent, and knowledgeable as the poem has progressed. He has resolved to learn for himself. This is the first time he uses the pronoun I, so he is now taking action and taking ownership over his own education and identity. He is empowered, and this sends a clear message to others to educate and to empower themselves. For those of you who've attempted the STAR Challenge, there are many themes and I probably won't cover them all, but the ones I've found are culture, individual experiences, memory, identity, history, authority, colonialism, power, enlightenment and vision. Time for your comparison PC's paragraph. Your question is, how is the sense of identity presented in Checking Out Me History and one other poem in the Power and Conflict cluster? You could find identity as a theme in many of the poems in the cluster, but the ones which come to mind are Kamikaze, Ozymandias, The Prelude, The Emigre and Remains. If you find the comparison part hard at this point, just do 2P's paragraphs on Checking Out Me History. Additionally, make sure you find quotes with devices and ones that you can really pull apart. Good luck and pause the video now. Finally, just to make year 11 that little bit easier for you all, select between 2 to 4 powerful quotations to memorise which you can analyse well. You can do this in the form of a mind map, flashcard or any other means which will be beneficial to you. Ensure that the key vocabulary for the quotes are written somewhere. These could be language related, like dialect or colloquialism. They could be language or structural devices, or context in terms of colonialism, for instance. Really consider AGAR's purpose in writing these quotes. Don't forget to send your work to your teacher for some feedback, and well done for completing the lesson.